Hey there, and welcome back to the Fuse Show. Today on our show, we have Mark Hinkle of Trigger Mesh. Today's title is Cloud Native, Automation and Event Driven Architecture, and the tagline is multi-cloud really an issue, or is it about integration? Mark has a long history in emerging technologies and open source. Before co founding Trigger Mesh, he was an executive director of the Node.js Foundation, with membership including Microsoft, IBM, Google, Intel, PayPal, and other industry leaders. Previously, he was the VP of Marketing at the Linux Foundation. Mark joined the Linux Foundation from Citrix, where he was the head of Citrix open source business. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Nice to be here, David. Thanks for having me.
So that's a lot of buzzwords and nouns. How do you personally define cloud native, and what is your company's mission?
Yeah, so cloud native just simply means that it's technology that was developed to be deployed in the cloud. So versus a technology that may have been deployed on bare metal or servers and then moved to the cloud. So that's cloud native. And Trigger Mesh, what we do is we leverage cloud native technologies to create integrations between your legacy apps, your cloud services, and your cloud native applications. So that's what we do in a nutshell.
I have taken a look at your website, and it does look like you're very event and trigger based, and that those triggers and events are meant to trigger other events or some sort of like analysis or congregation of data of some kind. Is it kind of like Zapier for engineers? Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, Zapier is very much a prosumer desktop of solution. And what we're saying is if you have a service, so you upload an image to, Amazon S3 and you want to trigger Google Vision to use the AI to identify that it's a picture of my dog, you can communicate back and forth. So the event would be an image was uploaded to this S3 bucket, and it would trigger Vision to run, and then there would be some output of that trigger, probably a few metadata around the image or updated database to say this is what that means. So that's exactly what it is for engineers who are combining cloud services, or it could be on-prem too. I triggered I did something in a database. I added a row to Oracle DB, and I wanted to replicate two of those cells in that row into MongoDB in the cloud. There's be a workflow from on-prem to the cloud as well.
Is this a solution you've built based off a need you've seen at previous companies, or how'd you come up with the idea of Trigger Mesh?
So my co-founder was his name is Sebastian Gizguan, and he was one of the first serverless framework authors. So he built something called Kubeless for Kubernetes early on, and he realized that there's this really old design pattern called event-driven architecture. It's been
Yes.
around for decades, but serverless was a manifestation of that, and it was going to be logical that you would want to be able to do multi-cloud. Everybody was, like the economics in Amazon S3 seemed to be really good. The compute in Google seemed to be really good. And then you have things like Salesforce and Splunk and Datadog and Twilio and all these other cloud services. And for you to create applications in the cloud, you're going to want to pool these from multiple clouds. So we originally started out from his experience writing Kubeless to realize that it was multi-cloud, and serverless was very, very hot at the time. We were actually Trigger Mesh started when Google talked about Knative at Google Next, and Sebastian had started working on ideas for Trigger Mesh, but we hadn't really formed the company yet. But when Google Next came out, they had quoted Sebastian as a serverless expert and listed Trigger Mesh. So we knew we were going to do something around serverless early on, and we figured Knative was the future because there were a bunch of function as a service frameworks out there like OpenFaaS and Kubeless and others. And we felt like Knative with Google's backing was going to be the sort of de facto open source serverless framework, but there was still tons of things that you wanted to connect with that. So that's where we figured it out, was his background in writing Kubeless, and also our background. Both of us worked on cloud.com an Apache Cloud Stack, and we knew that, from the OpenStack days and all these other clouds, that it was no cloud was going to be a all-in-one encompassing solution for any reasonably large enterprise. At the time, Netflix was a sort of single cloud company. I don't know if they still are, but everyone else was doing multiple clouds, and they needed an integration path.
Did you have a customer in mind before you start building, or did you build with the idea first?
We had technologists in mind, but we didn't have
Okay.
a customer in mind. So Sebastian's an engineer. I am a business guy who worked in trade consortiums, so at the Linux Foundation, Node.js. And so we knew where the technology was probably going, but we didn't really say we're going to go after Fortune 1000 banks or manufacturing or healthcare or anything like that. We were going to go after cloud adopters. We're going to go after folks who sort of adhered to the DevOps infrastructure as code kind of ethos, and that's the end user, but not the customer that we're looking at.
So along the journey, at what point did you have a better understanding of the who would be the best customer in terms of like the person paying for your services?
Well, if I look at my watch, I've gotten even more data in the last 24 hours. I think the thing is that early on we talked to some progressive folks in financial services, and when you start down one path, it seems like they refer their friends and such. So we've looked at financial services early on, but we also see more and more use cases. We looked at folks who are using Oracle Cloud and they want to use Datadog. Well, it doesn't matter what they look like, it matters what they use. In that case, it doesn't matter if it's a financial application or a healthcare application or some kind of cool web scale social application. What matters is that they are in need of transferring data in as close to real time as possible and making that data actionable. So that's sort of right now we seem to have hit a good vein of financial services folks, but the people that come to us are all over the map.
So I've taken a look at Zapier's website, and they have a lot of integrations. And I imagine there's a bunch of engineers who have to work in parallel to write those integrations. How does your company handle all those integrations? Do you have a large number of engineers that each handle one slice, or do you have a queue that a small team pulls from?
So we're addressing it in two ways. The first way is we do have a reasonably good-sized team of engineers across 3 continents that have worked on creating integrations, but they're integrations that are a little bit more customizable, because the endpoints for like a Zapier where you're pulling, say, maybe you're pulling your e-commerce reports from some platform and populating Google Sheets, the endpoints are very well defined. In our situation, you're basically looking to filter real-time streams of events and make them actionable by another system. So we've created connectivity between the two, and we use event streams versus APIs. So if you think about the difference, an API is like you and I having a conversation.
Yes.
I start with hi David, and you go hi Mark, and there's a back and forth. In the event stream, it's like a fire hose. So every event about what's going on with David and Fuse today, I subscribe to in a publication subscribe model. And then what Trigger Mesh does is if that's the fire hose, we're the nozzle. And by filtering in that nozzle, you can direct that stream to another system. You can filter out and only choose certain events. So that's sort of the difference in how we look at an architecture. The other thing is something that we're working on right now is we want to have folks bring their own source. So a source is a producer of events.
Yes.
And a target in our language is a consumer of events. And so what we want to do is provide almost an SDK experience for folks to write their own connectors.
Hmm.
And then in the long term, they could release them as open source, keep them private. They could give them to us and we can certify them and share them with others, those kind of things. So that's the big difference. I don't know if you can create, we originally started with, compared to Zapier. Zapier is typically targeted to a business end user, and we're typically targeted to an engineer or even an administrator who's trying to do something and hook up systems to create automation of some sort, or just distribute information all over the place.
So in the world of trigger mesh, is the data allowed to be unstructured, or do you have certain like structural requirements of the data?
What we do is we can consume almost any data stream, but typically what we're doing is converting them to a Cloud Events 1.0 specification, which is part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation projects. And that's the sort of typical way that Google or Amazon or Microsoft would consume an event. But there's no reason why we couldn't, we do event transformation. Our sort of open source transformation engines called Bumblebee, like the Transformers from Hasbro. And what we do is transform it into an event that's consumable by the target. So if they needed it to be a different format than that Cloud Events, we could. But that's actually a really, if you look at something like Apache Kafka, which is probably the most prevalent event streaming technology out there, the open source is, they don't do transformation, and that's a little difficult versus us, where we're actually consume a Kafka stream and transform that stream into something that's useful by the consumer or the target language.
Is it your goal that your customers would use your platform of trigger mesh in conjunction with an in-house Kafka ingester, or do you want it to be the replacement for a need for Kafka in-house?
The event collection and streaming is not something that we want to get into. Kafka is the most modern streaming, but there's the legacy enterprise service buses like MuleSoft and Tibco, or even we can consume event streams from Microsoft Event Grid or Amazon Kinesis. So we don't, or Google PubSub, we don't care about we care about the endpoint collection, but we don't want to supply that.
I see.
What we want to supply is, what really needs to happen is, you're already going to choose solutions that collect and stream data in all sorts of formats. You need a way to redirect and manipulate and put that data where it needs to go and enrich it, which implies that you add data or even strip some things out. So you may only want from Azure security logs, you only may need a certain kind of message, and you don't want to stream all those logs into Splunk because it costs for storage, and some of those log messages are not relevant to your application. So that kind of thing. We can strip it down, or we can pump it up with additional information.
Do most of your consumers use this for latency sensitive use cases, or more so like asynchronous use cases?
So I think the key for where we're in event driven is people want data in real time. So
Yes.
so that's where we're trying to take asynchronous streams of data and get them to where they need to go as quickly as possible. So you have a better experience. And what's happening is that organizations have lots and lots of pools of data, and they have data gravity problems in legacy data warehouses or in the cloud, and by creating streams of data to take it to wherever it needs to be, it sort of is breaking up that data gravity problem in a lot of ways. So I mean, I think that's why Snowflake has been such a runaway success, is because they're streaming data in real time all over the place, and that seems to be their most popular product.
How difficult is the integration of your, call it like SDK, like integration component? Like I imagine if let's say you get a new company and they say like, "Hey, Mark, I'm ready to onboard Trigger Mesh. Let's get started." Like, how long would it normally take to integrate into someone's backend?
Um, that's a good question, and it's a depends question. So, if they want to deploy it, we say that we have a cloud and enterprise edition, but what we really do is we deploy to Kubernetes.
Hmm.
So we have our cloud.triggermesh.io is running today, and anyone is welcome to try it out. Um, but you can also deploy it on Kubernetes using some Helm charts in a very short amount of time. And then it's just a matter of security and network configuration between the streams. If you had Apache Kafka, or if you were consuming streams from a cloud provider, all you really need to do is add your credentials, your secrets and such, and then you could connect to Kinesis and stream to Google in, I don't want to be too flippant, but under an hour easily. But
Okay.
you wanted to deploy it on-prem, and you were pretty skilled on deploying cloud native apps on Kubernetes, it's still, not that long. We've done POCs for the most part with our financial customers. It takes a lot longer to do the paperwork
I
than
see.
to do the actual POC because one that I can talk about is PNC Bank. They did a really, really interesting deployment that was fairly complex, ingesting streams from Kafka and kicking off serverless functions running on Kubernetes and Knative and using it to run policy as code sort of application. Few weeks for them to really see the value and get it running. Other ones like the Datadog to Oracle Cloud, I think that was, very, very short time for them to get it up and running. If you're a cloud operator, it makes a lot of sense. And we follow a pattern that's consistent with the way that you would deploy code using like a HashiCorp Terraform or an AWS cloud formation. So it's we do automation, but we take a very automated approach to deploying our infrastructure as well.
So if the integration isn't a major friction point in the sales cycle, where would you say the largest friction comes?
For us to get users to adopt,
Yes. Yes.
where to start. So everybody seems to have a integration problem. You have
Yes.
legacy apps, you have systems that are, niche for your industry, you have new cloud services you're not familiar with. And then you already have legacy iPaaS vendors, like there's Dell Boomi and there's MuleSoft and there's Informatica. And so they're just deciding, we know we have an integration problem. We know that our integration needs to be more real time and less synchronous like it was in the past. And so when we run into someone, it's usually because they have some pain point of that day, which is it's usually how we start. And then within 2 weeks, we usually have a list of other questions like, could you integrate my Oracle DB with, my Oracle Cloud DB? Or could you do a lot of stuff that used to fall under the heading of ETL, extract, transform, which is now almost the approach is you synchronize, is a more of a data sync approach than it is an actual, lift and shift to a new format. So that kind of thing is, I have yet to talk to someone who didn't start with one integration problem
I see.
and come back with others.
So do you find a lot of inbound customers or are they mostly outbound?
Um, about half and half.
Okay.
We actually early in November we went GA with our product, and so for just the last few months we've actually been selling in a traditional sense. Early on, we were looking at communities of Apache Kafka users, Knative serverless users, AWS Event Bridge users, and we've done deals with them. But it just sort of depends. We get some. We just closed the deal today. They were inbound, and we finished the paperwork for a large bank, and they were outbound. So it's half and half, but our business was our plan was actually not to start marketing and doing much outbound until this year. So we're pretty early in that. We're a venture backed company, and our first round of capital was just to build the product, not to go to market. So
That's
now we're
fair.
getting ready to go to market. So what I tell you today will probably be drastically different in a month. Yeah.
Isn't that always true with startups?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and we do a lot of things with partners, so which is not traditionally the way you do things with startups, but there are a lot of cloud vendors out there that don't have the same kind. Like Amazon's the gold standard, and they have Amazon, or not the gold standard, but the industry leader. And so they have a lot more tooling than other clouds. So their Amazon Event Bridge is one of the things that is very popular among their serverless users. We actually mimic the same functionality of Amazon Event Bridge, but for any cloud and any infrastructure. We actually are an integration partner for Event Bridge so that you could stream events from Amazon to on-prem and on-prem to Amazon. And so that's where we probably are different. And I was dead set against doing partner stuff until they came to us and actually started to have real partner conversations, because they're 800-pound gorillas and we're spider monkeys in the scope of things.
So how do you figure out the pricing model for something that can be on-prem?
That is a good question as well. So, here's the thing where we've landed on right now is everybody loved the pay-as-you-go model for
Yes.
the cloud until it made it to the CFO's office. And they realized that the forecasts were wrong, that because the pay-as-you-go, there's a lot of, if you're not really well-versed in how these things charge,
Yes.
there's more nightmarish stories about how people have run up cloud bills that were way beyond their forecasts. So to date, we have been doing a usage-based subscription model with limits on the tiers.
I see.
So we based on the number of workflows, we cap the number of workflows up until a certain monthly fee, and then if you add more workflows, you go into another tier. But you don't go into that. There's always a cap on the tiers, and that's actually made us more attractive to a lot of the financial buyers, because if you can't predict, it's one thing to predict, a subscriber-based business like a Netflix or Twitter or Facebook, that these are what your forecasted numbers are going to look like. But if your banking industry is not tied directly to network usage, it's hard to control your cost of goods sold and forecast your financials, especially if you're publicly traded.
So for the companies that do integrate this and it's on-prem, there's no, what's it called, variable resource needed from your end. That's right. Is that right?
Right. So
Okay.
they basically are deploying the software on Kubernetes, and the only thing that varies is the number of workflows. But it's all their own resources, and it's all their own cloud resources they're consuming. So if there is variability, it could be because they're using more storage in Google or Amazon, or sending more SMS messages through Twilio, or storing more logs in Splunk. But it's not around, at least for now. This is the model that we've decided makes the most sense, because we're a premium product. Now in our cloud in the long term, if you can technically execute serverless functions. So most of our customers are really just doing the event pass through. So
I see.
we would add something that looks a lot like Amazon's Lambda in the future,
Okay.
if need be.
So for all the on-prem solutions, does it ever need to quote unquote like phone home to like report the count of how many workflows have been processed and then cut it off at a certain point?
We're not putting cutoffs in right
Okay.
now. We will enforce it, but
Okay.
I learned long ago in my career that, you know, the worst, the big brother approach to thing usually ends up with someone feeling bad about the situation. I don't,
That's why I asked the
you know,
question.
I mean, I wouldn't say that we might do that, but have you, and I've many times hit the limit on services I've subscribed to. A lot of times it was for something silly, like I just hit my Dropbox limit this week because I hooked up an old computer and it sent
Oh.
all my like photos from 2000 on, and I was like, used an extra terabyte of storage, and I was like,
Mm,
how did that happen? But
mm,
I mean, obviously, Dropbox and any cloud service has a cost for adding that, but
yes.
I feel like there's been a lot of discussion on like the Amazon free tier recently because there is a free tier, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can easily exceed that free tier and get a whopper of a bill. And Amazon has been great about handling that, but until you get a hold of someone at Amazon, it's a very scary thing if you're a college student doing a project that you think is going to be free, and all of a sudden you get $500 and you don't have money for books or rent that month. So that's the kind of thing that I hope we can design in a way that makes sure that we get paid, but doesn't cause any unnecessarily angst for our customers or us.
As a funny aside, I was a college student back at Berkeley, and we did do a project on AWS, and we were given EC2 credentials from Amazon, I guess, for free for our project. But there was a quota for how much resources we had, and of course they let us over exceed that because we're just students, we don't know what we're doing. But I think
Right?
the professor quoted that one group, either out of, I'm pretty sure it's out of neglect or out of ignorance, they were able to run a bill up to $7,500 for that one project. And I'm like, dang, if they actually have to pay it, that's a half a semester of tuition.
Yes. There's a whole cottage industry around controlling cloud costs because it's one thing to be an engineer who is fixing something technically. It's another thing to be an engineer who also has taken the steps to know that what the financial repercussions of their technical fixes, which I'm sure and most of them could figure out, but it's very it's the difference between when you get your first credit card after you used cash all your life.
Mm.
Like, you can see the cash going away. When I got my first credit card, I hit that limit very quickly. It was nothing changed about the credit card, right? So same thing with cloud services is because the provisioning happens and then it's metered usage, it's very easy for you to run them up.
So obviously this product is very technical. How'd you assemble a team around this concept? And how'd you convince them to join you?
So we knew, I would say, 80% of our team from somewhere
I see.
before. So because we worked in open source, we typically worked in large communities of developers. So we knew our developers. Honestly, for our non-technical folks, I knew them from jujitsu while we were bootstrapping, and I asked questions for our web and SEO guy during class and sort of vetted him out. And then I'd done some other startups with our sales and marketing folks and our PR folks. And it's funny, when I was young, most of my friends were young and inexperienced too. And now as I get more and more gray hair, my friends have more and more.
You still have hair.
I still do, but it's not as thick as it once was. But yeah, what I find is that the relationships I made during my career, especially as it's one thing to bring people into a job where you're an employee. It's another thing to something that you found that's yours that you're a founder of. And so my from my standpoint, we've only brought in one or two folks who we didn't have a really, really good relationship with them or the person that referred them. So, and all the ones that were referrals or we knew have been amazing. So,
Oh, by far, referrals is just the best
yeah,
acquisition strategy for both users and employees.
yeah.
There's just so much extra trust built in.
And really, we're doing something interesting and cool. And if you're a engineer and you want to do, you know, push your limits, what we're doing in cloud native right now in Kubernetes is cutting edge. So it wasn't that hard of a sell.
So when I was at Uber, there was a lot of lunch table conversations about why people want to join startups, but just they're just afraid of taking that loss to liquidity. Because at that point, Uber was public. You're making, if you're a senior engineer making somewhere in the range of, I don't know, 300 to 450, that's a good amount of money. That's a good amount of money even in the Bay Area. And to transition to a startup where you're probably making like maybe a third of that, like did you find challenges in that?
Personally, yes.
Okay, okay.
I would say that the thing that we practice is so my co-founder and I we worked for free for a number of well probably a year and a half to 2 years on this idea, and a number of our folks worked as contractors at a reduced rate because they were our friends and they thought that there was a future in it. But the other thing that we put to work was what I call geographic arbitrage. So I have, we have engineers on 3 continents. I would say the majority of them could easily get a job at Google or Facebook or Amazon for a lot more money. They live in Germany and Spain and Kazakhstan and Switzerland and India, and they get to have the freedom of living where they want to live. We're pretty good about trying to accommodate time zones. Um, we get to work on cool stuff. Everyone is pretty like-minded. So that was actually I'm almost embarrassed to tell you the difference between a Bay Area Google engineer and some of our folks that are other places in the world, but in their
I've seen the numbers, the rough ballparks.
uh,
It's incredible.
in their respective geographies, they're
Yeah,
doing great. You know, the one
yeah.
guy he goes and um, works for like 3 months out of I forget if it's Bora Bora or Fiji, somewhere exotic near Indonesia during the months that it's super cold where he lives. And he loves that, and we don't care that he's there as long as he's available. And um, I feel like those kind of things, and those folks don't have the same opportunity as someone
For sure.
who lives in the Bay Area, so they're grateful for having the opportunity to work with companies like ours that are doing sort of cutting edge cloud stuff.
Would you prefer to hire more of those people, or would you prefer to hire people local to wherever you are, either in the Bay Area or near where you're living now?
More of those people because those people are skilled. They're good communicators electronically. Typically, they, you know, I feel like, I have people here locally. So we're headquartered outside the Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, North Carolina. Um, but we have a sort of center of gravity. But with the last year and the pandemic, we've worked remotely and it's worked well. I just want people who are, passionate um, about our technology, about doing things that are cool and hard. And really, I don't care where they're at because I started out, I got into tech. I lived in a very, very rural town, a one stoplight town in Pennsylvania, and one of the first internet service providers opened a call center about an hour from where I grew up. And that call center became, it was part of a company that was a large $14 billion company eventually. And the folks that were in rural areas that had an opportunity where they didn't take it for granted. Now I know there's plenty of folks in tech centers like, Silicon Valley and Austin and Portland and even RTP Raleigh where I live that have a lot more opportunity, and I'm happy to hire there. But in those areas where people have to come into offices or had to pandemic, you had more competition. So, competition drives up prices, and I am
Mhm.
pre-profitability company, so I really have to make my capital go as far as they can, and we've had really, really good success with it. And we're going to go. In a couple weeks, we're hiring someone in Australia who was from Austin. He moved to Australia, and um, he was a very early engineer at Chef that's now Progress Software, and he's happy to join us, and we're happy to have him. And other than trying to find the time to have real time chats, it works pretty well. I mean, Slack, if you were raised on IRC and then you got to Slack, it's not that big a deal. But it is nice to get the physical cues when you're saying something, because I make a lot of jokes and I'm sort of sarcastic. And if you're not used to that, you think I'm just the biggest jerk in the world. I say exactly the opposite of what I mean a lot of
Right,
times.
right, right.
Yeah.
I love sarcasm. I'm so afraid of it over digital means if I've never met the person before.
Yeah, I totally am. I have to say sometimes I'm joking, and then I feel like it sort of ruins the joke.
It ruins the joke.
Yeah, yeah. So
So for all these people that you don't have a strong connection to, like you don't have a referral to this person, how are you finding this talent? Particularly, I guess, technical talent.
yeah, that's the rough thing is that we sort of ventured away from that recently, and
Okay.
it wasn't the most successful for them or us. And this is because you don't have people tend to think that you have a shared set of values until you really start talking to them,
Yeah.
and I realized, well, I came from a blue collar farm town where people don't thank you for going out and baling the hay and milking the cows, but there are people that really need to feel appreciated, and you're not used to those kind of things. So for us, attracting talent, I think we have some big announcements coming on. Luckily, because we don't need to build that big of a team, I think the referrals will go quite some
Hmm.
time. But we're looking for folks where we don't have a lot of referrals in areas where we got to fill in, and you know, I've hired thousands of people who've worked for me over my career, and I feel like I'm decent at it, and we really just have to. And I learned, we recently we're getting ready to do an employee survey internally. We have 19 employees and contractors right now, but we want to figure out what people feel we're good at, because
Hmm.
my reality is probably different than the reality of someone who's sitting in Germany or Spain right now, or India, especially India. Um, and I want to make sure that when we talk about how things work here, that people have a clear understanding of how that works, and we set expectations for them, and they set expectations for us, which I think,
Hmm.
as a whole, employers are terrible about. Like, how many times have you ever gone to a job interview and they're like, "So, David, what would make you happy?" You just, I'm sure that at Uber that was probably not part of your, a big part
Not in
of
the hiring panel.
not
In
in
the
the high.
one-on-ones, yes.
Yeah, the one-to-ones down the line, but you should get that out of the way early on. So
Hmm.
what are the, and it's funny what incentives people want. Like, I would think startup folks would typically want stock options, but I think quality of life around startups is something that is a new trend. Um, I mean, I did a lot of startups, and we would work till the wee hours of the morning, come home, take a shower, go to bed, wake up, throw in a baseball hat, do it all over again. And it's all right when you are at a certain stage of your company, but that's not sustainable.
Right.
I'm sure when you were at Uber, you saw rocket growth and all the things that went on there, and you got to be, you know. And I did the same thing when I worked at the ISP. We went from 200 employees to, or no, 100 employees to 10,000 in under 4 years.
Shoot, that's incredible.
And the, I, at that time, I was, much younger and had more energy and stamina, and I didn't know any better, and so I worked and missed a lot of weddings and other kinds of family events, and you know went from my college athletic weight to my desk jockey weight, which was not a good transition, and all those sort of health and life things that I think um, were sort of a badge of honor, which is by the way not a badge of honor.
Oh, for sure.
you
When I
know,
was at Uber, I was suckered into it, but now that I'm on the outside, I'm like, oh, probably not the healthiest decision I've made in my
yeah,
life.
yeah. I mean, the end result is that you are being paid to provide a service
Yes.
to your company, and your company is paying you to provide that service. And at the point where you are over delivering and they're under delivering, it's not a good deal. And that's something that I hope I never get to at Trigger Mesh.
What else do you wish you knew from, like, call it, like, I don't know, a decade ago?
Um, you know, I wish I would have known that, um, you know, the the repercussions of compromises you make. And so we sort of touched on that, but if you work at a place that doesn't have the same values as you,
Hmm.
or if you feel like you've taken a job because the paycheck is better and then you're miserable, those are the kinds of repercussions of decisions that I really think through them today. If I bring someone on, or I take investment from someone, or any of those kinds of decisions, I'm like, these things are part of you for a long period of time. So you can't just be short sighted in your thinking. Um, the other thing is that even in the startup world, we have a tendency to think that we're some special. There are no original ideas. You know, I'm writing an article right now for a publication, and people who think Kubernetes and containers is such a unique idea, I'm like, it's application virtualization, and there was virtualization on the original mainframes, so it's not that much of an idea that's revolutionary. There's other things that are like cultural changes, like DevOps. That's a pretty interesting. It's so much different and human and effective than things like, you know, Agile and other things that were more methodologies. It's a cultural change. So, um, I do think that what makes you special is your ability to execute on your ideas and the ability to share your ideas and do so responsibly and ethically, which you would not think that those things would have to be mutually exclusive, but in many places I've been, I've seen them be
I hear you.
mutually exclusive. So that's the kind of things that I learned from, and you know that probably the biggest thing that I learned too is you really can't make a mistake by investing in people.
Hmm.
And not just paychecks, but making sure they're successful and happy and that kind of thing. I probably um, I knew that, but it becomes more and more clear as you get older and wiser and grayer. All
I
right.
think it's a great lesson.
Yeah.
Definitely one I can take to heart and try to apply more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, last question. What's the best way for our viewers to get in touch with you if that's something they're interested in or you're interested in?
So I am M.R. Hinkle, Hinkle, on Twitter. My middle name is Brian. If you call me Mr. Hinkle, I will chuckle, but it's M.R. Hinkle, or mark at triggermesh.com. Visit us on Triggermesh or LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with folks. I'm always anxious to meet people with something to share and interesting backgrounds, and you can never know too many cool folks.